It is the 11 Dubcast. I'm Johnny. He's George. Never in doubt. Never any doubt.
Well, never in doubt for some of us,
I don't know what you're talking about, George.
You don't?
No.
Well, let's pick up where we ended the last show, which was me declaring that I don't think anybody on staff is going to pick against Ohio State.
And no one did
last week. And
no
then you
did.
So cutely said, well, we'll see what happens. I don't know.
Coquettishly.
Yes, that's a great word, coquettishly. Yeah. And then two of the 14-ish, 15-ish members of 11 Warriors did. Dan Hope, who I know from speaking to him directly.
What a dummy.
Well, he and I both had cold feet, so to speak, about picking Oregon over Ohio State, and then ended up going the other way. So I could understand where he was coming from in terms of I was ready to pick against them when I thought they were going to lose, and then they ended up losing, and now that regret is fueling me to pick against them in another somewhat dubious spot. I had no such conflict because I just don't have any respect for James Franklin, and I think that was
that's completely justified.
But there was one other person that picked against Ohio State that's on 11 Warriors staff. How could you, Johnny?
Well, here's the thing.
How can you look me in the face every week that we do this and stoop to such lows?
You know what it is? It's writing threat level every week has infected my brain, and now I'm just like a hater of Ohio State, and it's through osmosis I've just turned into a horrible person. I don't know.
You've turned into a lover of James Franklin.
That's right. We should all be so lucky. I just didn't have any confidence that Ohio State was going to be able to cobble together an offensive line. That was it. That was literally it.
Which, based on the Nebraska game, is totally valid.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't know what the hell these guys are going to... I mean, and so then they bring in Carson Hinsman out of the doghouse, and they slot Jackson over to LT.
Yeah, and Jackson was having a letdown season, and it's like, oh, we're going to have the guy that's performing below expectations play a more difficult position. I think that'll probably work.
Yeah, one of the toughest positions technically, that you can
matching
play
up with like a guy who's a presumed first round overall NFL draft, not overall, but a first round NFL
first round draft.
Pick.
Yeah, and then
it'll work.
It'll work. It'll be fine
on the road.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in Happy Valley, right? Like in front of 110,000 people. Actually, it was 111, I think.
They were the largest crowd they've ever had.
And so I was, I'm sitting here, I'm like, they're not going to win this freaking game. And it's not like I called some blowout for Penn State. I mean, I thought it was going to be a close game. I think my prediction was like 24-21 or something like that. But here's the truth of the matter is,
you thought James Franklin was going to win a close football game.
I did. Which is stupid.
That's adorable.
And well, here's the other thing, and this is maybe my misplaced belief in like the just world fallacy, where I'm like, no, it'll happen eventually, right? Like, Penn State's actually good. James Franklin's not that bad.
It's not totally off base.
Yeah, but like
you'd think there's going to be some reversion to the norm, so to speak, at some point.
Yeah, well, apparently not, because they continue. Penn State, I don't know what it is with Franklin, and I do think there is a certain level of like, how like pets will feed off the attitude of their, of the people who, who have them. James Franklin, I think, is kind of an example of how that can happen in a football team or a sports team, where you've just got a coach that gets in these situations and just kind of, you can tell, just starts to squeak a little bit, and the rest of the team, that he's in charge of, kind of follows. And we're going to get into all the whys and wherefores, and I think Ohio State won this game. Don't get me wrong. I don't think this was a game where Penn State gave it away and Ohio State was lucky to get out of there. Ohio State, the Buckeyes,
it was a little bit of both.
It was a little bit of both, but my point is that Ohio State did things to win that game. It's not like they were handed to it by Penn State. But I also am just continuing to be flabbergasted at how bad James Franklin has been against the top 10. I think as of now he's like 3-18, which is baffling for a team that even like has any aspirations of even competence. You would think you would get more than 3 out of 21.
Well, Jason put it in Slack that somebody had been saying, like, or he saw somebody said on Twitter that, James Franklin is who Ohio State fans think Ryan Day is.
That's right.
And
Yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
that is
Exactly.
100% on the money.
Right. Right.
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Yeah, people who think Ryan Day is like this wuss who can't, he can't, stand the heat and all this other stuff. Like that's James
This
Franklin.
didn't count as a top 5 win because it's Penn State, and
Yeah,
you
right.
don't actually
Exactly.
have to respect James Franklin.
Yeah, but I don't want to talk about James Franklin yet. I do want to talk about the crazy, cool things that Ohio State was able to do. And
yes, this is a very positive episode of the Dubcast. There's
Yeah.
there's no dumbing down of expectations from me this week. This is we get to bask in the glory of the best win of Ohio State season so far.
All right, well then let's talk about it, because I want to ask you, George, what was your favorite moment from the game? There's a lot to pick from, but what was your favorite moment?
That's a great question. I think it would probably have to be, we were. I give Igbinosun so much grief because he
fouls every play.
And not only fouls every play, but then celebrates like he did something right after getting away with it. And I'm like, God, it happens every single game with this guy. It's unbelievable. And then it happens again in the second quarter of the game. And, I'm talking about this in our game day channel to the agreement of everybody. And then I send a message to Dan and Andy, who are my 2 UFC watch buddies, right before the half, because I try not to bother them too much when the beat is actually covering the game. But I noticed something. I was like, I can't help myself, and I just have to bring this to their attention. So there's a bad trend in like UFC and the MMA world right now. They just made a pretty big rules change this past weekend. But the funny thing about the rules is the rules very rarely get enforced correctly. And the biggest offense to that is fence grabs. Like, most of the time, if you grab the fence to prevent yourself from getting taken down to the mat, you're supposed to get a point taken away from your score if the fight goes to the judges. And that's almost never, ever enforced. They'll let guys get away with it like 3 times before they actually take a point away right now, which is the rules say if you do it once and it impacts, you're supposed to get a point taken away. But fighters have just started religiously grabbing the fence to prevent takedowns because they notice that nobody's actually going to punish them for that. Right. And so I told Dan and Andy, I said, watching Igbinosun play cornerback is like watching a UFC fighter commit fence grabs. They're just going to keep fouling until they actually get punished for it. And Dan was like, that's a good comparison. Yeah. And then the very next play, he makes one of the most absurd interceptions I've ever seen in my life. One that saved the game for them. Yeah. Honestly, looking back on it.
At that point, it was completely like that was a game that changed the entire momentum of the game. Like,
it washed away all of the gut, like, I don't know what you would call it, but like the bad feeling you got in your stomach when Howard.
You got that sour stomach. You got the bile rising up in your throat.
I don't blame Howard for really. It was like one of those just terribly unlucky plays where it's like, because he had the ball like in his left hand.
Oh, the fumble. Yeah, forget. Yeah, it
was an excellent play by the defender.
Yeah.
And it's just a really unfortunate thing. And everybody's like, God, I hate the touchback rule. I don't hate the touchback rule because it's like one of the, like, the defense already has so little room for error. Like when in modern football. Yeah, exactly. Why wouldn't you? Like,
I think it's dumb. I think it's silly that you have a situation in this one very specific part of the field that does not exist in any other part of the field. I think that's dumb.
But I can understand that argument for it. I just think that with how much the rules are slanted towards catering to the offense in this day and age, giving the defense an out like that seems fair in light of everything else that they have to deal with in order to stay within the rules. So I've made peace with it, even when it is to the detriment of my team, as it was on Saturday. Right. But it's a huge emotional letdown, in the same way that the pick six that Howard threw at the beginning of the game was. And I want to talk about more, obviously, about Howard and them rallying back from that a bit later. But in terms of what my favorite moment from this game was, I mean, that drive, you have that letdown of where they could have gone up by multiple scores, and then that happens. And it's like, wow, they were so good, but they don't get anything out of it because of this one little silly technicality, and that really sucks. And then Penn State is going all the way down the field, and it's like, oh my God, they're going to like equalize
this is a dogfight,
or take the lead, and like
right.
you know, it's going to be bad. And then, I mean, I said it when it happened. I and we should talk about this probably after Ask Us Anything too, to a certain extent, but I honestly think that as good and as talked about for years to come as Garrett Wilson's catch for the Jets was last Thursday night, that interception that Igbinosun made, I think is even it's not as phenomenal of a play because there's a much higher degree of luck involved in what Igbinosun did than what Wilson
Oh, sure,
did.
yeah.
But to still have the momentary awareness to be able to make that play happen
and get a foot down in bounds,
absurd is the perfect word
to like
to describe
carry the ball
it.
to the ground, like
Absurd is the perfect word to describe it. It is one of the most absurd interceptions I have ever seen in a football game. And it came at a time where it was like, I cannot say enough bad things about Igbinosun because in every other circumstance, he just makes me so mad watching him play football and getting away with this stuff. And then he does that, and it's like, okay, that's why that guy is starting on Ohio State's defense, because
right,
that play was just unbelievable. So that was easily my favorite moment of the game, bar none.
It was pretty wild, and one of my favorite parts about that was how Gus Johnson went from saying touchdown to incomplete.
I thought Penn State scored a touchdown, and I had already checked out.
Yeah, I thought that's
especially based on the fan reaction and everything. Nobody, when that play happened, thought that he picked it off.
No, God, no.
That's how absurd it was.
Yeah, no, and that's the funniest part about it is that like the crowd went from like, oh my God, we're gonna actually, we're gonna take it to Ohio State for once, to that sucks, that was an incomplete.
It's the same thing that happened with Will Howard fumbling the ball, but under entirely different circumstances.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Like just same emotional roller coaster. Like it's just so crazy.
That was pretty crazy. I that was a great moment. Definitely one of my favorite parts of the game. I talked about this a little bit in the social reactions thing when and social reaction is just a silly post with a bunch of tweets in it. But I try to put a few of my thoughts from the game into it, right? Just 2 or 3 paragraphs. And the point I was trying to make with what I was writing was that like the big games that Ohio State has played that stick in my mind have to have a component to them that like really it gets into my DNA. You know what I mean? It's something that really, really appeals to me on a visceral level. And it's not that like I don't appreciate other big wins, but there's got to be like a moment that I'm like, I'm going to rewatch this 100 times on YouTube. You know what I mean? Like there's got to be something that just gets to my core where I'm like, this is why I watch college football. And for me, that moment was the drive that they had to seal the game, where they didn't even think about throwing the ball. They ran the ball 10 times, almost exclusively, with the exception of Will Howard, like taking the little bootlegs, almost exclusively up the gut, right? Like, I mean, they weren't getting fancy. They weren't even pulling guards half the time. It's just zone blocking. And it's like, they were getting 9, 10, 12 yards every single time.
Yeah.
And not just, and it wasn't just like Judkins going off. They subbed in Henderson. He did the same thing. This is
after getting the ball on the 1 yard line.
On the 1 yard line.
Yeah.
On the 1 yard line. They had to get, to seal that game.
With something like 5 minutes left in the game at that point.
They had to get like 3 first downs and kill 5 minutes. And they did it by running 10 straight running plays up the gut. That was, to me, like, I know a lot of times I think we like overblow this stuff where we say like, this is the defining moment for the team and blah, blah, blah. That felt like an actual defining moment for a football team where they said, we're going to be something else that you think, we are. We're not going to be this soft team, whatever. We are going to run it down your throats. And one of the toughest environments in college football.
It's a tone setting stretch.
Yeah, it was wild.
Yeah,
and I have rewatched that drive probably 5 or 6 times at this point. And I could not believe what I was
It's a lot
seeing.
for a drive that doesn't result in any points, you know?
Yeah, that's right. But I didn't think they were going to be successful. I mean, that's really the thing. I thought even in that moment, I was like, these guys got to be tired. Maybe they'll get out of the shadow of their own, end zone, but I don't see them like being able to salt away a game. They really haven't. That hasn't been their MO with Ryan Day.
Not after what happened last week against Nebraska.
No.
Dylan Raiola outrushed all three,
right,
like Howard and Henderson and Judkins.
And right, and so I'm watching this, and I'm like, all right, literally from that first snap when they're on the 1 yard line, and I'm like, all right, let's just see what they do. Will Howard got 4 yards, and then Judkins got 9, Judkins got 6, Judkins got 15, Henderson got 6, Judkins got 2, Howard got 3. That ended up in
and
the
it's
first
funny
down.
Because after like the first 1 or 2 plays, I won't name names, but at least one high-level member at 11 Warriors was saying, like, now would be a great time to throw a deep ball to Jeremiah Smith. And I'm like, no, the clock is your friend. You are chunking them to death right now. Do not deviate. Just do this and get out of there with a dub. And that's exactly what they did. I was so happy. It was like, don't feed into the hype beast mentality that we need to just chuck it to Jeremiah Smith for a victory cigar or something.
Well, and that's what they did, but that's what they tried to do against Oregon, right? And they ended up getting bit in the ass about it. And so they
weren't throwing deep bombs or whatever.
No, I know, but
you're absolutely right. They got
right.
And I didn't even honestly think of that relative to the Oregon game, that them throwing in that moment, we complained about it a ton. And this seems like clear evidence that granted, they didn't have the lead in that situation.
Sure.
But in terms of late game play calling, it does seem like that they learned from that experience and have done more responsible stuff since.
Right. And then what was the quote after the game? Like they just had to drop their.
We got to let our nuts hang is what Donovan Jackson said, which.
And that's what they did. I mean, look, man, like that's big boy football, and I had more fun watching that sequence, I think, than I've had watching Ohio State football in a really long time. That was wild.
When I started at 11 Warriors, one of the pieces of advice that my father gave me was to stop reading the comments, but I'm a classically trained shit poster, so I can't help myself. I still have to on everything that I write. And unfortunately, that's carried over into YouTube. And even though most people are nice, we occasionally get people that are, challenging our credentials, so to speak.
Please don't ask to see my credentials.
Who are these guys that have never played a down of football in their life that are talking about Ohio State?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I can't speak for Johnny, but I did have... I did start 4 years on varsity in high school, oh, great, whatever. But I'm not bringing this up just to bring that up. What I'm trying to pivot to here is I played under Fred Miller, who was a Super Bowl champion with the Rams. He was, the guy, and I played center, and he hates centers because of a thing he had with Olin Kreutz when he was on the Bears. So nice. I was the object of his ire a lot of time, and I'm responsible. If anybody on the line makes a mistake, I get blamed for it, and then the other guy gets blamed for it. But I also had a defensive coordinator and a D-line coach that played with Michael and Marcus Vick when they were in high school at Virginia, because they were in the same class as both of those guys. Mm-hmm. And our defensive line coach, who was like one of the funniest guys that I ever met, used to make comments similar to the one that Jackson made about how, I do want to keep this PG. I want to try to keep this PG.
Try not to demonetize us on YouTube.
Sometimes you just gotta.
You gotta sack up.
Put it on the table.
There you go. Yeah.
Another part of the phallic area, so to speak.
Sure.
In terms of, there's just moments during a game where you just gotta let the other team know, like,
this is what you're dealing with, and
that,
like, well, no, but
this is what we're dealing with.
Yeah. And like,
that's exactly right.
And
Oh,
look, I
man.
got and I love that sequence because it was Ohio State. It reminded me of the Ohio State that I watched when I was a kid, right? Where it was like, we're just going to line up I formation. I mean, they didn't I formation them obviously, but like that's what it felt like. And
It's
like
like
I
the
said,
one element of jealousy I had watching Harbaugh
of
teams at
course,
Michigan, and
because that's what you
especially
envision
their
Ohio
game
State
against
doing,
Penn State last year, where they ran the ball like 30
right?
plays in a row, and they were like, you know what? If
We
that
don't have to
worked,
throw.
if
Yeah,
that worked that recently against this team, why don't we just do the same thing? You
right.
know, if our offensive line shows up, and they did,
Yeah,
they saw, like, unlike last week where it was clear that the only success they were having was with Howard throwing the ball, and they didn't lean into that. They saw this week that the team was having its most success on the ground and said, okay, we've got a lead.
let's
There's
keep it.
no need to get cute and deviate from that. And the other thing that I liked too was that, like, I talked about this earlier this year, where it was like, under when Justin Fields was playing here in under Ryan Day, you almost never saw him run outside of the red zone. It was
Mm-hmm.
like they didn't want to do the Urban Meyer thing, where it's like, we're going to give JT Barrett 15 carries,
Which is funny
and
because that's what Urban Meyer called for before the
right.
game. And I think you might have even pointed out that, like, if they do that, then some of those runs with Will Howard towards the end of the game don't work
And
because
in the same way
they're
that with
yeah,
Fields, it's like you save that weapon
exactly.
for when you're in scoring territory, because the defense isn't going to be thinking about it as much. They kept Howard on ice in terms of designed runs for almost the whole game.
And then
And
when
then
they
in the
needed it, it
moment
worked perfectly.
and then in the moment where they needed it the most, they let that out, and Penn
Right.
State was just not there for it. It's not
Yeah,
like
and
they
I
got
will say
killed on it, but they weren't prepared for it
right.
at all.
And I want to talk about the defense here a little bit because I thought they performed incredibly well. But I do want to say a couple things about Will Howard, which is, I mean, obviously you have that pick six at the beginning of the game where they disguise their coverage, you bite, and then they take advantage and whatever, and that sucks. I mean, that's a crap. But he came back, the rest of the team came back immediately, right? And went on, I think it was like a 75-yard touchdown drive that showed that they were like, no, we're not going away. This isn't like, we're not here to hang our heads or be sad about it. We're going to go into the teeth of this crowd. And we're going to score some points. And they did. And they ended up taking the lead. It wasn't his best game, but this guy, in a lot of ways is just a really mentally strong dude. I mean, he makes stupid mistakes. I'm not going to say he doesn't, but I also think that, there are a lot of quarterbacks who would have had that experience of throwing an interception in a big game at the very beginning and getting your team down, and then it would have taken them out of the entire rest of the game. And if you think that I'm talking about Kyle McCord, I am absolutely talking about Kyle McCord. So I just want to point that out. That
and I don't, and I compare. Like, it's impossible for me to look at what happened and not compare it to the Michigan game last year.
Of course.
I will say that McCord, even though Ohio State never led in the Michigan game last year, it's not like McCord totally wilted. He still had some big completions in that game. There was that one really, really long pass to Marvin Harrison where I think Harrison maybe kind of bailed him out a little bit because he did make the catch while he was getting pass interfered with, but that would have been a touchdown if the pass interference hadn't been committed. So it's, he did his best to throw them back into that game after making that mistake before, throwing the interception that ultimately ended the game when they needed to go get a touchdown in order to tie it and win it. But, the thing that most draws my ire looking back on that was that it was reported that McCord gave a speech to the team before the game about the importance of not making mistakes.
Yeah, right.
And then on the first drive, he does that.
Yeah.
And puts them in a position where they're playing from behind the whole game. And it's not a pick six, but I mean, Michigan scored immediately after getting that, making McCord make that early mistake in the beginning of the game. So it effectively results in the same circumstance where you have sabotaged yourself in the early going and are now in a position where if you want to put yourself back in the game, you're going to have to make up ground that you've already conceded, not for the reason of, well, I mean, the team's got to execute. The other team has to execute in order to capitalize on that mistake, but it's still you having to make up for a self-inflicted wound. How are you going to rebound from that early adversity? And last year, they did not do that very well in the Michigan game. They never recaptured the lead. The game was relatively tight for, I would say, most of it, but they never were able to get back in front. They never ended up recovering all the way from that. And you look even at more recent history with McCord. I mean, we talked about it last week very briefly, but the game that he played the week before, granted, Syracuse upset Virginia Tech as an underdog this past weekend, but the week before that, I mean, I think I would be surprised if there's a worse performance in the history of college football where a quarterback has thrown the ball 63 or 64 times and put up a Nathan Peterman.
I mean, it's certainly I would say it's probably the worst performance by a quarterback in major, college football.
I don't know any other quarterback that starts the whole game throwing no touchdowns and 5 interceptions and is given the leash to throw that much.
That's
so
pretty bad.
He made a mistake that got them in the hole, or I think it was his first passing attempt that got picked off when they played Pittsburgh, and never rebounded from that. So, of course, then while we've all had a laugh at McCord on the last episode and are like feeling very vindicated that we've moved on from that guy, despite the fact that we've been saying Will Howard is good for one boneheaded play in every game this season, he then does the exact same thing to start this Penn State. And at that point, I'm already mentally preparing to lose just because I have PTSD from what happened with the Michigan game last year. And I'm like, well, if this is how Howard's going to set the tone based on how this team is done in this situation before, they're down multiple scores now because of this. Yeah. I don't feel good about it. And especially too, and we haven't talked about the defense yet, but what really surprised me in this game is that when Penn State got the ball on the opening drive, there was an angry crispness to their execution. They weren't getting very, very big plays, but every guy that touched the ball was running angry for
they wanted to
5 or 6 yards.
They absolutely wanted to prove
the drive.
They absolutely wanted to prove something. And I think, kind of maybe even transitioning and talking about the defense, that was, I think, a point where I was like, is the defense up for this? Because this is a game that Penn State needs desperately, that James Franklin wants incredibly hard. And they're going to have to bring it because Penn State is going to come at you with everything they've got. Like this is for them. This is their Super Bowl, not just because it's Ohio State, but because this is a vindication game for them. And you're right. They brought it. But here's the thing. They only got a field goal on that first drive.
Yeah, and looking back on it, that drive is even a microcosm of what actually happened.
Exactly.
Because it's like they come out looking like they're playing with an edge. They're only getting little bits of chunks, but they're playing with an edge.
They're getting first downs.
This team looks talented.
Ball.
And then James Franklin rotates the quarterbacks when they get in the red zone.
Yeah.
And granted, the penalty that they got had nothing to do with the quarterbacks. It was an ineligible man downfield. That's not on the QB. So, but you're still affecting the momentum and the rhythm of the guy leading the offense when you do that.
And it was
weird
because
out and they get a field goal.
Yeah, and it was weird because every time they brought in Pribla, it was like, what does this serve? What purpose does this serve your team?
What would you say you do here?
Yeah. And like, not that he's not a good player or anything like that, but it just, to your point, it felt like it just destroyed the flow of their game.
I said last week, if that guy starts full-time over Aller, I'm more scared of this team than I am with Aller starting. And I felt kind of vindicated by that stance based on what happened.
One thing that I was really heartened by in that first drive is that Cody Simon had 5 tackles. And I was like, okay, somebody's on one today. And he played out of his mind. I mean,
he did play a good game, but tackles can kind of lie to you sometimes. Like
I know. I mean, you don't necessarily want your linebacker getting
Borland used to have those games where he'd end with like 18 tackles, and it's like, it's because they're getting like 8 yards into the middle of the field where he just happens to be standing on every play.
Yeah, in this case, though, I think Knowles was pretty active. They talked about there was some of the Penn State offensive linemen talked about how Ohio State got really creative with their blitzes. Did a lot more stunting than normal. Cody Simon was part of a blitz package that you saw a couple times where he would just he was either disguised behind a defensive lineman and then would run up on a delayed blitz, that kind of stuff. That was super effective. I mean, it was frustrating to see Tuimoloau and Sawyer not get to Aller, they would pressure him and then he would escape, but that's still a pressure. And I don't know, man, I thought the defense as a whole played really, really well. You had two really good running backs for Penn State who did essentially nothing. That's a pretty big honking deal that you were able to hold Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton to 40 yards basically between the two of them. Yeah, it was, to me, I thought that the defense performed incredibly well. Drew Aller turned back into a pumpkin. Honestly, I know that I'm a certified Aller hater.
Huh?
Yeah. I know I'm a certified Aller hater, but I thought he was much improved this year. And that was another reason why I thought Ohio State was going to lose, because I was like, okay, this guy's kind of turned the page a little bit. He's a little bit older, a little bit wiser. He's one of the best statistically one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And they made him look like Drew Aller of last year. He did not, he picked up some yards with his feet, but that's not something that really bothers me too much because it's not a central component of that offense. And he was pretty ineffective as a passer. They did the same thing that Michigan's doing all season, which is okay, we can throw passes to our tight end and literally no one else.
I can't remember who pointed it out, but might have been somebody on Twitter, but somebody said something like, I love that the Knowles game plan was going to be, we're going to let the quarterback and the tight end do whatever they want. And we're just going to take away we're just going to totally render the rest of the skill players ineffective. And it's yeah, they let the tight end run all over the field, and they let Aller kind of get the 5 to 6 yard scrambles out of designed pass.
And that's fine.
They couldn't do
who cares?
anything else.
Yeah, because Penn State ended up with 270 yards of offense. By the way, the exact same amount of yards that Michigan had against Oregon this past week. I think that's an interesting little comparison. Yeah, Ohio State, obviously Penn State's got a really good defense. They've got an excellent defensive line. They still had, over 350 yards of offense. Penn State didn't do much of anything, and they didn't score an offensive touchdown. And now again,
Knowles deserves so much credit for that.
Yeah, and some of that's a result of goal line stands that were a result of Penn State just completely borking it when it came to play calling. I mean, the stuff that precipitated the that drive that I just gushed about was was Kirk Campbell and not Kirk Campbell. Who's the Penn State offensive coordinator? Losing track.
I don't know, but I can't believe the decision makers at Penn State have screwed up the late game and red zone play calling. When have they ever done that against Ohio
Yes,
State?
It's so out of character for them. But that's what I'm saying. They shot themselves in the foot so many times, and Ohio State was right there to take advantage. And again, no offensive touchdowns allowed. You're going to win games doing that. And they played a really damn good team. I know people are going to poo-poo it. Some people are going to poo-poo it because it's Penn State. But that's a top 5 win on the road in a hostile environment, and you completely shut down their offense.
I do have a point I want to make about Knowles, but just to put a bow on what we were saying relative to Howard, I talked about what McCord said before the Michigan game. And then you compare that start to how Howard started this game. And again, like I said, I was pretty, based on the PTSD I had from that game, I'm mentally preparing for them to lose. And then they immediately respond with points and they take the lead back. And even though they lost, I think, a little bit of steam after they went up can't remember if they recaptured the lead before the end of the first quarter, but they had it going into the half. And granted, the Igbinosun pick had a big part to do with that, but they could have been up 2 scores if the fumble into the end zone hadn't happened. And then nobody got in the end zone again the rest of the day. Ohio State had 2 field goals and Penn State didn't. I think Penn State had 1 field goal in the second half, and then nobody scored any other points. So but still, it was clear that this team has leveled up its composure from what it was last year. And that doesn't happen if the guy in command of the offense isn't setting the tone.
Oh, sure.
And
Yeah.
so Will Howard absolutely deserves a ton of credit for that. And even with him deserving the credit for that, the first thing that he said after the game, when they were interviewing him on the field, he just very transparently said, "It's probably the worst game that I played."
Yeah.
And he literally used the term bailed out in saying my teammates bailed me out. He put all of the blame on himself.
Yeah.
He gave all of the credit to his teammates, in spite of the fact that he really only had that early blunder and then a very, very unlucky fumble into the end zone to speak of. That is the kind of humility that you want in a leader. Like
Yeah.
somebody that just leads by that kind of example, not somebody that talks a big game and then goes out and does the opposite, which is what McCord did. Like he really won me over in this game by playing through that kind of self-inflicted adversity, and then instead of when asked about it afterwards, being humble enough to admit this was one of my worst performances, and it is through the grace of my teammates that we were able to get through this, in spite of the fact that he played pretty well otherwise.
Yeah,
I have
had some
nothing
really
but
good
things
throws
to say
too.
about him.
Like that was the thing. I mean, he
His
had a
deep
great
ball
pass
is
to
better
Emeka.
than it's way better than any of us could have expected
Yeah.
the last couple of weeks.
It's gotten better.
Even if Jeremiah Smith still quits on it occasionally.
That was really funny to me. Like in the
I
moment,
think
I was
Klatt
like,
was right that he lost it in the sun for a moment. I don't think he was actually expecting an underthrow.
I don't know.
I think he lost it in the sun.
I think that's
we saw that
entirely
happen
possible.
in multiple NFL games.
Yeah. I think it's
2 weeks
entirely
ago.
possible. It was very bright out. But I do that other interpretation is also very funny to me.
Now the thing I wanted to say about Knowles was that I did a lot of criticism of the situational play calling relative to the blitzing. Not a lot of it after the Nebraska game, but that one third down where Nebraska scored their last touchdown towards the end of the game, and then complained about it from his first season into the last 2 years in terms of being too aggressive and then too conservative. And then there was the Oregon game, which none of us were happy about. And Chip Kelly didn't have a bad Oregon game, but I think a lot of people were unsatisfied with Knowles. And then this was just a total bounce back performance. My favorite play of the whole game for them defensively, other than the Igbinosun play, was a third down that I think was in the third or the fourth quarter. And Franklin is doing the quarterback rotations again. And it's like 3rd and 7, and they're putting in at one point I actually got Aller confused with his backup because I thought Aller was wearing number 9, but there was just so much quarterback swapping that I just couldn't keep track. But they rotated the quarterbacks, and then Knowles dialed up the blitz, and they resulted in an incompletion of the punt. And I love that decision just because you're capitalizing on the fact that the guy isn't in a rhythm, that he's coming back into the game and is just in like – if he's in for like maybe 2 or 3 plays or whatever, and he's dealing with the duress, it's one thing. But when you're coming back off the sideline and you just, even though you've played earlier in the game to a certain extent, when you've just got to, snap back into it, it's just not as easy as if you've done it on previous snaps. So capitalizing on the fact that they rotated, sent the blitz after, even though it wasn't 3rd and a mile, and in most situations I'd rather just play the sticks. I thought it was a great situational play call, and that was on both sides of the ball exponentially better than it was against Oregon or against Nebraska.
Yeah, I agree.
I think very highly of Will Howard after this game, but I think even higher of Knowles and Kelly based on the way that they both rebounded from Kelly having a bad game with Nebraska and Knowles having a bad game with Oregon. I'm ready to believe in this team again after this performance on both sides of the ball.
And you know what? Like, I don't know what this means for this team long term because you've got a lot of games ahead of you. I mean, you still got to play 4 more games here. You've got one huge game against Indiana where you're going to have to prove yourself. Obviously, you've got the game. But in the immediate aftermath, I mean, you got to feel pretty good about how the coaching staff handled this, how the team handled, early adversity and bounce back. It was just a really great game to watch. It's kind of game that gives you faith in Ohio State football because that's the kind of game you got to win, and you got to win like that. So I enjoy that quite a bit. And
I just hope the offensive line keeps showing up the way.
Oh, no kidding! It doesn't get
remains to be seen. That was the biggest surprise of the game, bar none.
It was pretty wild. There were some reports. I heard some scuttlebutt that Ryan Day was not quietly, he was telling people, but he was pretty confident about the offensive line going into that game. And, I heard that and I was like, all right, we'll see. And
it's just some kind of hypnosis trick.
Yeah, I was going to say,
the
like,
Nebraska game.
That's right. And I was like, all right. But then it came out and the combo worked great. And Jackson, I think, made himself a lot of money by showing himself to be a viable left tackle. So hopefully, like you said, that continues. And hey,
not just him, but Hinsman played center last year. To have that guy slide over to left guard
after not doing anything for almost a year. Yeah.
In terms of when we talk about this school being an NFL factory, one of the biggest things that they do so many things well in terms of prepare. Part of the reason that these NFL rosters are littered with Ohio State guys that maybe otherwise didn't play as much when they were in school is just because they do such a good job at teaching the little things that NFL teams need. Right. The running backs all block. The receivers can all block.
Oh, we didn't even talk about the blocking that freaking Henderson and Judkins did. I mean, holy crap, they were annihilating dudes out there.
It's a shame that Henderson's pancake was wasted on Howard, otherwise unluckily fumbling the ball away.
He was so stoked about that too. I really love that.
But the offensive line having that kind of positional diversity is something that's extremely important to NFL teams in a league where guys get hurt all the time and need to be asked to slide over. That willingness and ability to play multiple positions is really important if you want to get on a roster and stay there. Right. And there's so many guys on Ohio State that have come through here in recent years that are equipped to do that. And you saw it reflected in the success of what happened in this last game.
Yeah, they did a great job. And, whatever criticisms you might still have of Knowles or Day or anybody else, just understand.
Or Justin Fry.
Yeah, or Fry. That's right. Just understand that you're not at the level that Penn State fans have gotten with James Franklin, where they're arguing with him on the field after the game and yelling back and forth. And it's not good to be James Franklin right now. Frames Janklin is going through.
It's funny. I said when I saw the video of him arguing again, because obviously,
which I have no idea why you do that after I know that your emotions are high, but I don't know, man.
First of all, nothing's going to live up to 2018 when he literally had to be restrained.
From,
going at. But
yeah.
So I watched the initial video without actually being able to hear what he said, and I thought, okay, he's clearly at least learned something from that experience.
Right.
But then the audio comes out later that he actually did say something, and he was basically, and I didn't have a problem with the first thing that he said in terms of if you're going to be a man and say all this and whatever, it's this guy's being a little ass. It's okay to call about. But then he ends it by going, "What's your name?" What are you going to do? Dox this fan because he's giving you a hard time?
You're going to come after him? Yeah, give me a break.
You're going to send the Happy Valley Mafia after this guy? Come on, dude.
Yeah, it was.
That part was unnecessary. It still wasn't as bad as 2018.
No.
I think it's being blown out of proportion a little bit just because it's, the head coach at Penn State.
Well, yeah, he doesn't need to be talking to anybody.
It isn't as bad as what happened 6 years ago.
Fair enough.
As the biggest James Franklin hater in the room, I'm willing to let that one go. There's so many other things to make fun of him about.
That's
after
fair.
This game and otherwise.
So that's the Penn State game. We spent a lot of time on it, but it was a lot of fun. So that's why we deserved it. It deserved
the best win of the season for Ohio State.
I agree. Best one in a long time, honestly. It's, to me, that's probably the best one in the last 2 or 3 years.
Wow.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's high up there for me. So anyway, that's that. We're going to get to Ask Us Anything, but before we do that, we want to remind you that the Dry Goods store is our sponsor here at the 11 Dubcast. Drygoods.11warriors.com. Shirts, hats, stickers. Check it out. Lots of cool stuff. Lots of fun stuff.
We got to get
things.
We got to get a drop your nuts shirt on there.
We're just going to start selling truck nuts, but they're going to be Buckeyes instead of, testicles, I guess. So let's start here with Kevin. Kevin wants to know, this is a very simple question. Who do you think was the best football coach in Ohio State history? Woody Hayes. Is there another answer? I don't think there's another answer to that. I think it's Wayne
I don't know,
Woodrow.
man. Cooper at his peak,
Yeah, right. Carol Widows. What about Carol Widows? No, it's got to be Woody. I mean, national championships, legacy, all that other stuff. I mean, there's no other. Wes Fessler. I don't know. Like, I don't know what else you can say about that.
I mean, there's some recency bias people that would try to say.
I guess. I don't. Woody Hayes has more than twice as many victories than the next highest Ohio State coach.
I think a better question is, who do you rank Tressel higher than Urban, or vice versa?
Yes,
I think that's a more interesting question.
I rank Tressel over Urban because watching Tressel's teams beat other teams was funnier than what Urban was doing, just because Jim Tressel ran a Stone Age offense that should not have worked. And like people, I said this a long time ago, but I got into an argument probably on Twitter or Reddit or somewhere about people talking about Miami and Ohio State, in 2002. And I was like, yeah, you can complain about all of these, like, the missed call or blah, 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 or the pass interference. But I'm like, Miami got beat by an offensive game plan written on the back of a Denny's napkin. Like they got beat, by the dumbest. Yeah, by Craig Krenzel running the ball 50 times. Like that's who they got beat by. So don't tell me that like they had every opportunity to like be better than Ohio State and they weren't. Ohio State was the better team. And so the fact that Jim Tressel was winning these games until he didn't, right? Until like he came up against like USC in 2008, 2009. But like he was winning these games with the most Stone Age dumbass form of football that wasn't really that, because it was brilliant in its own way, that you just had to be perfect, right? And everything else. And his teams were, and I loved watching that. Yeah, I put Tressel over Urban.
It's a difficult discussion, because the thing that Urban has that is a massive feather in his cap is that he never lost to Michigan.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
That's such a vital.
But I will say, here's what I'll say though. Jim Tressel calling his shot. Jim Tressel calling his shot over Michigan when he got hired. It's really hard to express to people who weren't old enough to really like.
It's a let your nuts hang moment.
That's right, yeah. But like as somebody who grew up in the 90s like I did, and just absorbed loss after loss after loss, and then you've got this guy coming from freaking Youngstown State and saying, "We're gonna beat Michigan." And then he does, right? Like saying
that a guy as mild mannered as him too.
Yeah, right. Very, it's hard to explain how much that meant to Ohio State fans. And I don't know that Urban Meyer really ever had a moment like that. Like this is a guy who came in like Gordon Gekko and said, all right, well, we're going to win and we're going to win national. And you're like, okay, let's bet, let's go.
And then he did. Great.
And he did, but it wasn't fun. It wasn't like this, like
they went undefeated their first season.
No, I know. But my point is it wasn't this, like Ohio State was already a really, really good program at that point. They had gotten to the mountaintop under Jim Tressel. It wasn't a situation with Tressel where it was like, I don't know if we're going to be a relevant program anymore. Like, I don't know if we're going to slide back into because the way Cooper had them prior to that was a team that was in disarray, a team that could not beat Michigan or win bowl games, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my god, are we like South Carolina now? Like, is that what Ohio State's going to be? And Tressel changed all of that. So I
can't speak to my conscious feelings about what the state of the program was when Tressel came in, because I was in like kindergarten or first grade at that point, so I could hardly even pay attention to my own shoelaces, let alone the politics of Ohio State football. What I will say is, I was a freshman in college, Urban's first year, and there was very much this clearly was not the feeling around the team. And I think we even talked about this a little bit when we spoke to Chris Fields earlier this year. But when it was, we were just trying to figure out, like, does this season actually matter? Like, is there really a reason for us to be going to the games other than just to show up? Like, because it's like, what are we ultimately playing for? Mm-hmm. That is such a difficult thing to deal with, I think, if you're actually on a team. When you don't have an end goal to play with other than you're just, the NFL guys clearly want to prove that they're going to be able to make it to that level, but the whole team isn't going to go to the NFL. So how do you galvanize a team, motivate a team to play their best that entire season when there's really no direct incentive to do that for that year? It really speaks to Urban's ability as a coach to motivate that kind of season out of that team the way that he did. It was, I honestly had more fun with that season than I did the year they won the national championship, just because you were going in every week thinking like, it's so great that they're undefeated. I wonder, like, it became what they wanted to play for, was that
Sure.
we want to end this season without a win because we have nothing else, or without a loss because we have nothing else to strive for, and they pulled it off. And I think that the program was in a little bit more of a state of flux, even though the long-term prognosis was good, just because this is only season thing.
I don't think they were anywhere close to where they were in like 99, 2000.
I don't disagree with that,
because they obviously didn't.
The Fickle season was not fun.
It wasn't fun, but that was still a team with a lot of talent, right? They had great recruiting classes coming in. I don't think anybody was worried about the long-term health of the program the way they were at the end of the
but when you're in that situation where you don't really have anything to play for, things can go off the rails very quickly.
Yeah,
look at what happened to Florida State. Look at what happened to Florida State this season.
Yeah,
they were 13-1 last year.
That's right. And now I think they're the only FBS school not to score like 21 points in a game, something like that.
There's like at least a dozen individual players that have scored more touchdowns this season than Florida State.
Oh yeah, Ashton Genty has more points than Florida State, which is really great.
So things can go off the rails really quickly. Yeah, so anyway, that's a more interesting discussion to flesh out for another time. But I honestly, I don't know what my own answer would be to that question, because I think there's arguments for both guys, but I'm not ready to just anoint one over the other.
I am, but that's fine.
At the end of the day, Woody Hayes is above all of them.
I know.
Yeah, that was the original
He's
question.
Head and shoulders. No, he's head and shoulders. You're right. This one's from a good friend, Alvin. If you're Ryan Day against that team up north this season, are you running up the score? Of course you're running up the score. What are you talking about? Like, he's already said in private, by the way, Michigan fans treat this like this is something he said, like, at the corner of High Street and Neal or whatever, and was like, I'm going to do this and blah, blah, and I'm going to hang 100 on him. Like, that was something he said to the team in private that got leaked. But of course you're running up the score.
I thought he said it on the conference call where they were talking about
no, that was something he
said. Michigan bailing from COVID, and then he said it on the conference call to Harbaugh.
We didn't say it to Harbaugh. That was something that was said in the locker room to the team, and then later they had a beef where Harbaugh was complaining about something, and I don't know, but that was not part of that as far as I remember.
All right.
But yeah, of course he's going to run the score. This is from Jen. When the Buckeyes win a big game, do you do anything to celebrate? I just rewatched the game 50 times. That's, basically what I just talked about. Like, I find that moment that just speaks to my soul, and I put it on a loop until I, can only feel good feelings. Like, that's pretty much it. Like, I have probably watched the entirety of the 2014 Sugar Bowl, like 40, 50 times. I used to be this thing. So when I was a teacher, I would go in on the weekends to do grading and stuff. And I would put, because it's in its entirety on YouTube, and I would put it on the background, and I would just like grade papers to us winning the Sugar Bowl. And I probably did that for like 4 or 5 years. So like, yeah, that's my routine. And until they win another awesome game. So
I'm so bad at savoring success. Like, I'm the type of person,
you gotta love it.
This goes back to, I talked about playing football earlier. Like, I could do 100 things during a game, and like 99 of them could be correct. And after the game, even if we win, I'll just be thinking about the one thing that I did wrong, which a lot of, I think a lot of successful people have that mentality.
Oh, sure.
But it can really sabotage your own happiness. Like,
yeah, you got to enjoy it in the moment.
Right. And I haven't been. I've gotten a little bit better at that as I've gotten older. Just because it's like, you eventually realize like, man, you gotta chill out, or else it's like, what's really the point of like putting yourself through all this?
Right.
And it's made worse by the fact that you have every mistake you make, you got a former Super Bowl champion yelling at you, just strictly in the context of me playing football. But I've tried to get better at that as I get older, but I've watched so many Ohio State games at this point that it's like, I'm not gonna.
Sure.
I'm not going to celebrate a win over Western Michigan, even if it's a shutout. Like, no, it's like I've been through the motions so many times at this point that
for the big stuff,
winning has become the expectation. I don't celebrate meeting the bare minimum standard.
For the big stuff, George, I hope that you learn to savor in the way that I have, because it's a lot of fun.
I have this show to celebrate with.
Well, there you go.
Like,
that's true. We have spent the better part of an hour.
We went 40 minutes talking about the game.
We did.
It was great.
So that's Ask Us Anything. Thank you for sending those questions in. We'll keep answering them. We got a few things to talk about before we get out of here. First of all, Ohio State men's basketball, that's a thing. We haven't talked about it at all, and we were talking about it.
I heard nobody on the beat is in Vegas.
Yeah, that's right. No one save one amazing man.
Oh, one guy got to go,
who will keep us informed. So here's the thing. We haven't talked about Ohio State basketball. We obviously will talk more about it. We were talking before we started recording about how it feels like basically it's just, basketball is persona non grata until December.
At least mid-December.
Yeah. And so here's the thing though. If your interest can be piqued, I will tell you that as of now, Ohio State, their first game, right? They're playing Texas, 19th ranked Texas, out in Vegas at the half, winning 38-31 versus the Longhorns, and they're nailing some threes. They're 10 of 17 from beyond the arc.
Who's making those threes?
That's a great question. You've got a lot of dudes out there. It's Bruce Thornton who's nailing some. Michi Johnson's getting some. Mobley is 3 for 3. So we got some things going on here that we may have to get into. So that's a fun.
So welcome development from that scrimmage against Cincinnati.
Yeah, where they got just skunked. So hopefully that continues in the second half. We'll have to keep an eye on that.
Now, to their credit, Andy, who watched that scrimmage much closer than any of us did, said Diebler was going highly experimental in that game. So even he was just coaching,
rotating whoever.
I really don't give a shit about this. I'm just going to kind of throw some crap at the wall and see what sticks.
Whatever, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
I just don't want to see them lose to Findlay or something, where they've kind of closely played schools like that in the past, and it's what's really going on here?
Well, right now it looks like they're killing it, so good for them.
See how the second half goes.
Yeah, men's soccer.
Carmen's crew is still my OSU basketball.
There you go. Men's soccer won a share of the Big Ten championship, I think, for the first time since 2015. Number 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament, so that's awesome. Congrats to those dudes. And I've got to obviously mention Ohio State women's hockey, number 2 in the nation, taking it to St. Thomas this past weekend. First game went really, swimmingly. I think
all the hockey schools, it's half of the schools that play hockey in Minnesota in college.
Yeah, Minnesota.
St. Thomas, Minnesota, Duluth, Minnesota. It's one of the, do they play any other state for hockey?
Yeah, Wisconsin. and North
Minnesota
Dakota.
East.
Yeah. Wisconsin and Minnesota and North Dakota.
What is Wisconsin really other than a directional Minnesota?
That's right. They won the first matchup against St. Thomas pretty easily. They had to actually go into overtime to take them down in the second game. But look, Ohio State women's hockey is continuing their rampage.
The
after
march
that.
To the dynasty.
Man, they got PO'd after that first couple games there where they just did not look good.
They heard the dissatisfaction in Johnny Ginner's voice. And said,
right.
This is not a reality we can
That's
abide.
Right. They're out there. Joy Dunn has really turned it on in the past few games. They're great. So
What
again, keep an eye on those. those ladies who are out there on the ice, especially get out to the ice rink, check them out, and support. Like I said, one of the best, most successful teams in recent Ohio State history, and maybe the best coach in recent Ohio State history. So that's pretty sweet. Next week is Purdue. And normally this is where I would have some kind of like ominous thing to talk about and be like, oh, Purdue. But this might be the worst Power 4 team in the country. Like, they are abominably bad. They are so bad. They are the worst team in the Big Ten.
Who did they give a scare to? Was it was Illinois a couple of weeks ago?
I think it might have been Illinois.
I think it was Illinois
for
that
a half
randomly
second.
scored like 40 points on or something, and people were like, "What happened here?"
Yeah,
because it was Illinois, because that was part of the reason that was the week before the Michigan game.
Yes,
where Michigan was coming off a bye to play Illinois. Illinois had given up like 40 points to Purdue the week before, who was the consensus worst team in the conference this year. And they were like, how can we not score any points on this team that Purdue nearly took to the woodshed the week before this? Right. So, yeah, it was Illinois. But otherwise, outside of that game, they've been pretty miserable. And they were favored to beat Northwestern last weekend, and they got upset at home. So they're
pretty bad.
It's tough going for the Boilermakers this year.
Is. Oh, also, we didn't mention Michigan real quick. They lost to Oregon. They look bad because they're.
We don't want to talk about it because they actually play better than anybody expected.
No, they did. Well, that was the funny thing is like they're still bad, but they're not like
they made
terrible.
A good account of themselves relative to the expectations.
Yeah, I mean look, I said this a couple weeks ago. I think I hit upon the perfect way to describe this team. They're a C-tier football team with B-tier aspirations. They're never going to be any better than that. Davis Warren has played pretty well the past couple weeks. He hasn't turned the ball over.
He never should have been benched.
No, he shouldn't have.
I thought that was a gross overreaction to the Texas game.
I agree. It was really stupid. And, now they got to ride or die with him because Jack Tuttle's, medically retired and Alex Horgy can't throw the football. So, look, they have problems. I mean, I'm not out here trying to tell you that Michigan's like a good football team because they've got a one-man receiving core in Colson Loveland, who's a tight end. Their starting running back, Callum Mullings, has been terrible the past two games. I think he's run for less than 40 yards on like 20 plus carries. Like, he's bad, has been bad. And their defense, they got gashed for like 300 some yards passing. So like, they're not good, but they did acquit themselves better than I think some people expected. And they were in it. They had a chance to win. They had a chance to make it interesting in the fourth quarter. And of course they went 3 and out, but like they had a shot. Like, and part of that I think was maybe Oregon getting bored, after being up 28-10 at halftime and just thinking like, okay, well, we're going to double up on these guys and just coast and get out of here. But Michigan didn't give up. They kept fighting. And I gotta tell you something, man, like Ohio State should by all rights beat Michigan right on November 30th. But, and they would, and I'm pretty confident that they will.
I mean,
but
it's not going to take a page from the game that just happened where Jim Knowles said, we're going to let the quarterback and the tight end get all of the yards for the offense. And
right. Well, that's what I said.
I
even said that during the game.
It seems like you could beat Michigan by doing that.
I said that during the game. Josh was giving me the business about it. He was like, oh, our threat level guy is going to turn everything to Michigan. But I was like, yeah, dude, like this is what it looks like when you play Michigan. They've got one guy to throw the football to. Their running backs can't do anything right now, and their defense is just sort of there. And it's like, okay, so I think Ohio State.
You're not a truly like gifted Ohio State fan if you're not constantly thinking about Michigan and how much you hate them.
Exactly.
You don't want this enough if that isn't your mentality.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. So before they get to Michigan, they got to get past Purdue and Northwestern and unironically Indiana. So that's going to be interesting. And next week, look, I'm excited to see them just beat the absolute hell out of Purdue. And then we get to go to Wrigley.
I mean, as I'm saying, like, oh, I've been the tempering expectations guy all year. And now we get to celebrate because they had their best performance of the season against Penn State. I'm not I think the game is lined at like 38 points or something right now for Ohio State. let's back up. Okay. Yeah. Like let's just get through this.
I'll
settle for a 3-score win. We don't need to go scorched earth on the Boilermakers.
We did see that Ohio State this week. I think the stat came out that they're one of the worst teams against the spread in the past several years. So hopefully they reverse that trend against Purdue.
It's like the esteemed Brett McMurphy says, good teams win, great teams cover. So,
yeah, that's right. Thanks, Brett.
Got to live up to that mustachio standard.
That's right. So next week we'll be back to break all of that down and talk more women's hockey and I guess basketball if we have to. But we'll still be basking, I think, in the glory of this really fun win against against Penn State. And then, of course, we'll add Purdue to that. So thank you for joining us this week. We'll be back next time. And until then, I'm Johnny.
I'm George.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, folks.